election it is. Aside from our regular update, as your mayor, I'm excited to present to you the League of Women Voters, an incredible organization here in Oakland that year after year provides a pros and cons explanation of all the ballot measures. So it's an unbiased, non-advocating explanation of what the proponents and the opponents are saying, what you should know about who's funding the ballot measures, all sorts of great information to help you exercise your democracy with as much information as possible. And I cannot think of a year where that is more important than this year, 2020. We are so thrilled to be joined tonight. Maybe Gail, you can wave, by Gail Wallace of the League of Women Voters. She's going to be our pros and cons speaker tonight. And then after Gail's done, I'm going to actually be one of your speakers tonight. Usually we only feature guests, but I'm going to add a little bit of information about the local measures on your ballot, as well as some specific impacts that are unique to Oakland of some of the statewide ballot measures that you should know about. Please feel free to send us your thoughts, your questions, your comments on Thought Exchange or through any of our social media platforms. With that, I'm ready to give our weekly update. What's going on in Oakland? Let's start with the state of COVID-19. The big news this week is that Alameda County got moved from the red to the orange tier, and that is good news for us. That means that we are truly flattening the curve, that your sacrifice, that everything that you've done to follow the orders, the direction of the scientists is paying off. So thank you. What does that mean? It means that right now we're seeing about 3.4 new COVID cases a day per 100,000 residents. Now that is still pretty high. To get down to the next level, the yellow level, we're going to need to get that new daily case rate down to only less than 1 per day. Now we're doing a little bit better in our positivity rate. It is 1.5%, and that actually is enough to qualify us for the yellow level, which is less than 2%. Will be our next milestone. We are already there with our positivity rate. Now, obviously, that is not true for all groups, and that's why we are so proud that California has adopted a health equity metrics. And right now, Alameda County has a health equity metric of 3.2%. And to get to our yellow tier, that needs to get down by a whole percentage point more, down to 2.2. So that gives you a sense of where we are. Now, it's very important that you know that orange tier activities are not yet allowed in Alameda County, but our health officials are preparing new orders that will likely go into effect the week of October 26th. So get ready to have some new activities like limited indoor dining and expanded shopping opportunities that will probably become allowed in Alameda County and Oakland starting on October 26th. I know a lot of people can't wait. Next slide. We have just extended the deadlines for several of our CARES Act relief grants. So please, we just announced a new one specifically for home-based businesses. If you are also an artist, if you are a small business person, or you are a nonprofit, we have relief grants available to you. You can find out about all those grants as well as where you can get relief for rent that is owed or trouble paying mortgage for your home at oaklandca.gov/CARES Act. Again, so much information at the city's website, oaklandca.gov. And then /CARES Act will show you all the different ways that the city is providing direct grants to people in need. Next slide. One of the things that was a happy moment this week is that we launched kind of our Oakland Slow Streets 2.0 or phase 2. A lot of people are loving the slow streets, but think that the barriers look like a construction zone and want to see something that is more reflective of their neighborhood, creates a sense of community and expression, and feels a little more permanent than those barriers and kind of ugly signs. Oakland was the top ranked out of 189 cities that applied for national funding for a local artist to create these expressions, which also serve as road barriers for the slow streets. And so congratulations to Jonathan Brumfield, Oakland artist who received this grant, and the fabulous neighbors in East Oakland that have created a community garden out of a traffic barrier. I want to, at this moment, also acknowledge that this week also was full of tragedy. As we were celebrating this slow street in East Oakland, only 3 blocks away was a triple shooting, and 2 people, 2 loved ones, lost their lives this week. I want to assure you that this absolute tragedy of gun violence that we have seen since the shelter in place went into effect is something that we are working so diligently on. In partnership with our Department of Violence Prevention, our ceasefire community partners, and the Oakland Police Department, please expect to see violence interrupters, ceasefire captains out walking the streets and really sending a communication that we have got to put the guns down and that the city is here to help people get through this difficult time and to support them in healthier, safer choices. So again, our hearts go out to the family and friends of those lost this week and frankly all summer, and that this is really a tragedy, that it compounds the health tragedy of COVID, and one that Oakland has been suffering from for a long time. Next slide. Other good news this week, Oakland was selected to join Bloomberg Philanthropies City Budgeting for Equity and Recovery. And this week kicked off this national initiative, and I'm very proud that Oakland was one of only 2 cities that were highlighted in their very first session as a city that has seen unprecedented economic growth and improvement to its economic stability, and yet with the impacts on revenues of COVID-19, all of that is at risk. Oakland was also selected for its clear track record and its commitment to putting equity and specifically racial equity first in our budgeting decisions. Stay tuned with what we learned from this national network. Next slide. Also, we are inviting Oaklanders to submit their own ideas for our capital budget. The capital budget is money for new physical projects. They can be repairs that are needed to your local library, to your local playground, to your park. It can be the roads that need to be fixed or the street trees that need to be planted. Any physical improvement that you want to see in your neighborhood. Traditionally, this has been a staff-driven process. And this year, we are taking every effort to try and actually hear from you. What are the physical improvement projects that you would like to see in the public spaces and public facilities in your neighborhood? So please get involved. If you need help, call our office, the mayor's office, 238-3141, or you can go to the link that we're going to put on your screens. It's too long of a URL for me to read, but we are inviting you to submit your own neighborhood improvement ideas as part of the capital budgeting process this year. Deadline is October 31st. Get it in before Halloween. The deadline is coming up. Next slide. Flu shot. We know that particularly this year, we cannot see our hospitals overwhelmed with flu victims, particularly in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So please, it is super easy to get a flu shot. I love this. It's easier than cleaning the garage, if you're lucky enough to have a garage. And you can find out more by going to fightflutogether.org. I've committed to getting my flu shot this week. We all saw Gavin Newsom's guns this week when he got his flu shot. So you too can go out and get one. A lot of folks, I know I'm a Kaiser member, are making it easy with drive-through flu shots. They're at the pharmacies. They're really easy to get this year. Very important, more than ever, that people get a flu shot, particularly during COVID. Next slide. And we are excited that we are trying to make voting as easy and accessible as possible. And kudos to Alameda County and particularly the Registrar of Voters. Accessible voter locations. We used to call these polling places, but we now call them accessible voting locations. They're going to open on Saturday, October 31st at 9 in the morning, and they will be open every day through the formal election day, Tuesday, November 3rd at 8 p.m. But it is going to be so much easier to vote early and on the weekend at a time that is convenient for you. You can learn more at acvote.org. acvote.org. You can find out about whether your ballot's arrived in the mail. You can track your ballot and whether it's been counted. Lots of great information now through the website. Also, Alameda County is doing a drop stop tour. It's going to start on Monday. It's going to be, for many, many days, and it will probably come to a stop near you. The other map that you see on this screen is the locations for drop boxes for your mailed ballot. Again, you can learn more at acvote.org/dropstop. Vote by drop box. These are, again, official. Don't be fooled. Don't go to an unofficial box. These are the official Alameda County boxes. Of course, you can always call that Registrar of Voters 510-272-6973. Next slide. All right. We did get some questions in advance, but we want to hear your questions or your comments. You can advocate for your favorite ballot measures tonight through Thought Exchange. You can click on the link or you can text 603-585-348. And you can text the number 72855 to that number. So again, text 603-585-348 to the number 72855. We want this to be a great exchange of ideas and be as interactive as possible. And with that, it's such a pleasure to introduce Gail Wallace. The League of Women Voters has been serving our community for more than 100 years. They celebrated their centennial this year, along with women's right to vote. And I am personally indebted to the League of Women Voters for getting me interested in local politics when my godmother brought me to my first League meeting when I was in high school here in Oakland. So Gail, thank you so much for everything the League does for our city and for our democracy. Gail.
Thank you so much, Mayor Schaaf, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. As you and I both know, voter education is the heart and soul of the League. And so this is a terrific opportunity to bring you some information on these measures. Next slide, please. I wanted to make a comment before I launch into the pros and cons, which is to say people from the League often wear two hats. Tonight, I'm really going to wear the voter education hat and present to you both the pros and cons of these measures in an impartial fashion. Sometimes we advocate, but tonight we're informing. Next slide, please. The first measure we're going to discuss is Prop 15. It proposes to change the tax assessment of commercial and industrial property. And the one thing that both sides agree on, I don't think we'll move to this slide just yet. We'll keep with the, thank you. Both sides agree this is a big one because of the consequences, whether it passes or it fails. So we need a little background to understand the change that's proposed here. 42 years ago, California changed its constitution, stating that all properties would be assessed for tax purposes only when they were bought and sold. This was true for all properties. This particular measure wants to change that with respect only to commercial and industrial properties. It has absolutely no effect on residential properties, and it also makes no changes to the tax rules governing agricultural properties or businesses that are valued under $3 million and other small businesses such as your home-based businesses. So we're talking, with respect to this measure, large commercial and industrial properties. So what's the proposal? The proposal is that instead of being reassessed when they're bought and sold, they would be reassessed every 3 years. The rationale behind this is that these large commercial properties do not change hands as often as residential and smaller properties. And so over time, their assessed values become more out of line with market rate values, and the income to local governments and schools drops as a result. So the proposal is simple: reassess these large properties every 3 years, but give every one of the businesses a tax break of $500,000 on their personal business taxes. The money would go towards local governments and schools, and this is why it's big. The legislative analyst estimates that it will raise revenues, if it passes, between $6.5 and $12.5 billion statewide. That money would be allocated approximately 60% to local governments and 40% to schools. Because we're Oaklanders, I pulled out the estimates for what Oakland would receive, and it would translate to approximately $60 million a year for Oakland and $25.5 million for OUSD. One thing I always like to point out with these things is, why are we voting on it? And we're voting on this because our tax laws are written into the Constitution, and any change to the Constitution requires a ballot measure like this. Okay, could we see the next slide now? So with each of these measures, I'm going to show you who the proponents are, who the opponents are, and essentially how much they've invested in the outcome that they're arguing for. So as you can see, those who are in favor of this are the teachers, Democratic Party, our own city council, school districts throughout the state, the League, Mi Familia Vota. And there are a number of business groups and farm groups, taxpayer groups who are opposing it. So what are the arguments they're making? Those who are for this want to point out that 10% of the most highly valued properties throughout the state will be the ones that produce 90% of the revenues. That's where the effect is going to be, because these are the properties that haven't changed hands for so long. They want to accentuate that there are tax breaks for small businesses, and that this law keeps in place protections for homeowners, renters, and farmers, and that provisions are made to train county assessors to be able to implement the law. Those who are opposed point to the large increase in property taxes for the businesses affected, raise concerns that consumer prices might rise, and point to administrative costs of implementing this law. Let's move to Prop 16. We've got quite a few on the ballot, as you know, so we'll be moving through, but I really encourage you to put your questions out there, and the mayor and I will be really happy to address them later. Prop 16 proposes that we allow government entities to consider diversity as a factor in public employment and education and contracting decisions. So again, a little history helps to understand the motivation here and what the hoped for results are. Before 1996, California public entities had affirmative action policies that were aimed at increasing opportunities and representation from various groups of people, women or others who had been received prejudicial treatment because of race, national origin, or other unchangeable characteristics. But in 1996, that changed because Proposition 209 came before the voters and amended the Constitution to say that these characteristics could not be considered when public entities hired people or when they granted admission to students in our colleges and universities. And they couldn't take these into consideration when arranging for contracts. So the proposal here is to say, no, let's go back to the pre-1996 era. Let's reverse Proposition 209 and allow state entities to take account of these characteristics when they're establishing their policies and their programs. So one thing I think it's really important to understand is that if Prop 16 passes, everyone in government still has to adhere to both federal and state equal protection laws, which forbid discrimination. And California has some of the strongest anti-discrimination laws in the country. Also, it's important to realize in the talk of affirmative action that this proposition would not allow quotas because that would be a form of discrimination. The fiscal impact of this is unknown and uncertain because it's not really clear what new programs and policies state and local entities would choose to adopt if Prop 16 passes. Can we see this next slide, please? Great. So here we see some of the people who have come out in favor and against. And you'll see the various individuals, Kaiser Foundation, the Teachers Associations, ACLU, nurses, the league itself, several chambers of commerce, and then other groups such as Students for Fair Admission, American Civil Rights, American Freedom Alliance, opposed for these reasons. The supporters say that a yes on Prop 16 is going to be a move toward more equal opportunities for all Californians, and that it's an appropriate response to a long history of structural racism and inequality. And that despite the fact that we live in one of the most diverse states in the nation, if not the most diverse, women and people of color are still discriminated against under current law, or at the very least underrepresented given their percentage in the population. And that this proposition would allow state governments, universities to conduct professional development programs for special groups defined by these characteristics, and that would be a good thing. Those who are opposed say this would be a step backward, introducing a new form of discrimination. And they believe that in some sense it might be perpetuating a stereotype that minorities and women can't make it unless they get special preferences. They also allege that Proposition 16 will require costly bureaucracies to enforce its provisions. Next slide. All right, 19, we're back to taxes. That's tough, I know, on a hot evening, but Prop 19 says, should we change the Constitution? Again, a change in the Constitution, that's why we're voting on it. Should we change it to modify the rules for transferring property tax assessed values and use new tax revenues for fire suppression efforts? I'm always taking you back to the past, but you know, we need to know the past to understand the present, particularly here. So as I mentioned when we were talking about a prior proposition, about 42 years ago, California changed the law to say that your property tax would be assessed when you bought your property, and it would be reassessed when you sold it. So if you hang on to your property for a long time, because it can then only increase 2% a year until it's resold, a disparity opens up between the assessed value when you bought it and the market value that's moving at a much faster rate, usually increasing. So that posed a problem for people who were over 55, moving towards retirement perhaps, who wanted to be able to move, but who didn't want to lose that low assessed value that had accumulated because they had stayed in their homes for a while. So what we did was change the law and say that people who are over 55 or those whose physical condition required them to move, or someone who had been impacted by a natural disaster like a fire, could once in their lives take this low tax base with them and move to a certain number of counties within the state who decided to join this program, provided they bought their new house within 2 years of the sale of their old one. So the first thing that Proposition 19 proposes to do is open up this. Instead of just being able to take this tax valuation with you one time, you can do it 3 times. Instead of just moving within 10 counties, you can move anywhere in the state. And it would still allow anyone who had suffered a loss of their home in a disaster to take that low tax value one time. So that's a kind of give. It's kind of an expansion of what exists under the current law. But there's another part of this measure that takes something away. And that is that under the current law, you, if you own your residence, can will it to your children or your grandchildren. And once they inherit it, they can keep that low tax basis whether or not they live in the home. So they can choose to rent it out and still pay the taxes that you were paying based on the price of the valuation of the property when you bought it. So this takes something away in the sense that no, that's no longer going to be the case. If this measure passes, you would only be able to give your property to your children and they keep that tax basis if they chose to make that their principal residence once they had inherited. So there's a little bit of give and a little bit of take in this measure. And the 2 aspects of it, whether you can take your low tax rate and buy a new house and move around the state, or whether your children and grandchildren can inherit under certain conditions, really don't have much to do with each other. So as a voter, you need to decide, do you like both of the results, which are quite different and separate in voting for this law? What's the fiscal impact? The fiscal impact is a little uncertain because it depends on how many people take advantage of this. And it would probably, according to the legislative analyst, yield schools and local governments tens of millions of dollars per year initially, and potentially much more as time went on. It would also cost a bit to administer initially in that same tens of millions of dollars. Any savings realized over time would be distributed every 3 years to local governments for fire suppression efforts. Next slide, please. So here we have those for and against. And if you think you're having a sense of deja vu, you are, because we saw the first part of this measure about the ability to move more frequently and take your low tax base with you in a previous measure a couple of years ago. But now it's married with this other provision regarding inheritance. Supporters say that Prop 19 would expand rules for homeowners and for wildfire victims or people who have physical demands that require a move and give them freedom to move out of their homes, make those homes available for young families and move to a more appropriate venue and home. And those who are in favor of the inheritance part of it say this closes a tax loophole and would result in revenues of the state. Those who are opposed to this say we've already amended the California constitutional provisions on these tax aspects 3 times to protect the rights of families to pass their home along, and that we should not change it. And they're afraid that reassessment to market value when subsequent generations inherit will force them to sell the property because they won't be able to afford the higher taxes. Next slide, please. I suggest a deep breath. We've done 2 tax measures. That's a lot. This is a little different. Proposition 22 22 changes, or would change if it passed, the employee classification rules for app-based transportation and delivery drivers. That's a very abstract way to refer to companies such as Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, these app-based transportation companies and food delivery services. What they want to do through Prop 14, because it is primarily these companies that have funded it, is carve out an exemption for themselves. And they want to carve out an exemption to the prevailing California law, which was a law that was passed last year and adopted a certain standard as to who is an employee and who's an independent contractor. It makes a difference. Why does it make a difference? Because if someone is an employee, they're going to receive a minimum wage. They're going to get paid overtime. They're going to get paid sick leave, family leave, unemployment compensation, and workers' compensation insurance. That's a package characteristic of the employee. Traditionally, the independent contractor does not receive that package, and instead they have a freedom to work for multiple employers and more independently direct their work. So when the state passed this law in 2019, under the law that was passed, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and these other companies were put into the classification where they should classify their workers as employees. They said that really isn't the correct classification for their workers. They were sued by the California Attorney General, and that case is still being worked out at the appellate level. In the meanwhile, they have come directly to you and said, we want you, by passage of this proposition, to create this exemption to allow our workers to continue to be classified as independent contractors. And classically, we have you're one or the other. But these companies have said, we're going to sweeten the pot a little bit here, and we're going to add something on so that even if this law passes and our workers are classified as independent contractors, we're going to give them a package of protections, not the same as that employees would have, but it would be something like caps on how long you can work in a day. 120% of the minimum wage, but only for the hours worked while you're actually driving a fare or delivering the food. A stipend towards health insurance rather than full coverage, insurance towards some medical expenses, and trainings in safety and sexual harassment. The other aspect, before we go to look and see who's on both sides of this, to note is that they have built into this proposition a supermajority qualification. And this is something else I think you're beginning to see in some of these propositions, which you as voters should sit up and take notice of, because it's an important part of the law. This law says that it would require a 7/8 vote of both houses of the legislature and the governor's signature to change the law, and then the only change could be in the direction of one that enhanced the legislation. What does that really mean practically? It means that effectively someone could only change this law by gathering signatures and once again putting another measure on the ballot. Let's see who's for and again. With the next slide, please. Great. And so as you see, take note of the numbers. This is the most expensive measure in terms of the investment that the proponents are putting into it. And what they are saying is a failure to pass this law could result in a loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout California and force them to curtail service in low demand areas and during non-peak times. They say this is necessary to recognize and allow a new classification of worker, the gig worker, and that their workers want the kind of flexibility that status would give them. They also say they provide a service to people who don't own their own transportation and who are not well served by public transit. And so reducing their services would be harming people. Those who are opposed to this say that this measure provides fewer comprehensive benefits and worker protections to drivers than they would receive under the current law. So they do not want any exception. And they say this would exempt these companies from paying millions of dollars toward public safety programs like unemployment insurance. Those who are opposed also point to this idea that it's risky to pass these kind of measures at the ballot because, particularly with this 7/8 provision, it's very difficult to change it later should adjustments be necessary. And they also point to process. They think this is an attempt to preempt the legislative process, which worked itself out last year, and that if the companies have objections to the law, they should work those out with amendments in the legislature. Okay, I think we'll move on to Prop 23. Prop 23, kidney dialysis clinics. This is going to give you a sense of deja vu too, because we saw a kidney dialysis measure just in the 2018 election. This is a little bit different. That one was an effort to limit the profits that kidney dialysis companies would be able to earn. This one is actually more addressed to creating requirements for staffing and reporting. So let's ask ourselves, where are we with respect to dialysis? By the way, that last measure failed. So now we are looking at this again. And if you were to need dialysis, the current situation is such that it's your doctor who's going to decide that and recommend the frequency. And then you would go to one of these freestanding clinics, presumably, to receive that treatment. And under federal law, your own doctor would be required to visit you once a month while you are receiving dialysis. And under the current situation, the clinics themselves also have responsibilities. They have a doctor who supervises the treatment and practices of each clinic. And the clinics also report blood infection rates to the federal government, and the California Department of Health licenses these clinics. So what would change? Nothing changes with respect to how you interact with your own doctor or his or her visits to you. What would change for the clinics is that they would be required to have a physician present at the facilities all times, including evening and weekend hours of operation. They would have to report dialysis-related infections to the State Department of Public Health, as well as the reports they make to the federal government. They would not be able to discriminate against patients based on the source of their payments. And they would have to obtain the state's permission to close a clinic or to reduce services. So this is most decidedly likely to increase costs for the clinics because it would be far more expensive to have a physician on site. The question is, what is the effect of that? It's difficult to know. It's possible that increased costs would be passed on to insurers or to the state in the case of, or federal government in case of Medi-Cal and Medicare payments. It's possible clinics would close or reduce operations. It's possible they would renegotiate fees and there would be no closures. Could we see the side of the money, please? So as with the last measure brought in 2018, we have an influential union, the Service Employees International Union, bringing the measure. And we have, among other companies, DaVita and Fresenius, who run by far the largest number of clinics throughout the state. So you're going to vote yes if you want the state to add more staffing regulations and reporting obligations. And you're going to vote no if you don't want the state to change the existing situation. And once again, I would point out that some of these measures are really difficult, especially when you think you have in your hands the welfare of your fellow residents here. So there's a question, are we the right ones to be deciding that are some of the opponents will bring up. There's only about 80,000 of the 40 million Californians who use dialysis centers. So your decision as to whether these kinds of improvements would, as proponents say, increase safety for the patients, or whether you vote against it and say the safeguards in place appear to be sufficient, or that you would prefer the legislature to decide this in hearings when more data could be presented. Next slide. Right. This is my final one before I turn it over to Mayor Schaaf for some talk about local Oakland measures. This is Prop 24. It's complicated. And once again, I'm going to go back to where we are now. In 2018, California passed a Consumer Privacy Protection Act. Okay, and it gave us the right to know about and access the personal data that a business is collecting about us. And we could opt out of the sale of our data to third parties. And any guardians of minors must give their permission for the sale of any data. You have a right to equal service with all other customers, and you can request the deletion of information that's been collected about you. And that law that passed in 2018, just rolled out last year, is being administered by the California Department of Justice. Okay? So this is, you should know, a 52-page proposition. So there's going to be a vanishing number of us who will have read any significant part of it. But let me try and summarize what it does do. It creates a new government agency in addition to the Department of Justice's work on this. That new agency would be the California Privacy Protection Agency, and it would be responsible for making regulations to increase accountability and of enforcing penalties. The new law would allow consumers to request not only that companies not sell their data, but that they not share sensitive information about issues like health and genetics and finances and race and religion. It would also triple the fines for some violations. What will it cost? Difficult to say. The Department of Justice would still prosecute the crimes, but the new agency would develop regulations. What the law does is set aside $10 million from the general fund, which you should know is less than 1% of the state budget. And the way these costs would be balanced against any fines that were collected as a result of penalties is the unknown here. So very difficult to say the bottom line fiscal impact. The proponents of this say that it's important to direct the businesses not to share personal data and to give you the right to correct the personal data that they have collected. And they think that they have fashioned a set of laws which makes it more comparable with European regulations and therefore potentially makes enforcement down the road more easier. So what is it that gives people pause? Why are some people opposed to this? First of all, it's the complexity. It's that issue that's come up several times tonight is like, is this the right vehicle to come to the people with a proposition versus work this out in the legislature? Their second argument for those who are against it is that the new law that we passed in 2018 is just getting rolled out. We just rolled it out in 2019, and we're still in the test drive stage, and that changes that need to be made could be made in the legislature. We should allow that law to play out and see its effect. They specifically object to the rollback of some existing protections in this new proposal, saying that only businesses that buy, sell, and share data from 100,000 individuals or households are subject to the rules. In the existing law, it's 50,000, so it's got a wider scope. Also here, under this law that is proposed, the companies could withhold discounts from individuals if they chose not to participate in loyalty and rewards programs. So there's an argument that there's a penalty for people choosing to opt for the maximum privacy. Also, it requires consumers to opt out one by one, directing each website and app not to sell their information, rather than have a global opt-out, which you may not see yet on your phones and computers, but I'm assured it's coming. So can we see the numbers on this one? So on the yes side, we have Mr. McTaggart, I believe from San Francisco. He was actually very instrumental in the formation of the existing law, but he's in favor of these additional changes that are proposed here. And then you have various consumer groups, the ACLU, Public Citizen, and the League on the other side. Mayor Schaaf, I didn't watch my watch too much. I hope I kept us within the time frame. It's a race for place with these measures.
You were perfect. I went 5 minutes over on our introduction, and so you actually finished right on time. So I want to talk really briefly. Gail, you did a great job of doing pros and cons on some of the state measures. I want to just kind of highlight some Oakland-specific impacts of a couple of the measures. And first, we can talk about both Prop 15 and Prop 19, which would revise the good old Prop 13 property tax structure, both for commercial properties as well as for inherited investment properties. Again, not properties where the inheritors live in the property. And the legislative analyst says that even Prop 19 will produce a net increase in property taxes that will actually go to local jurisdictions and our schools. And so what are some of the things in Oakland? In Alameda County, Prop 15 is estimated to restore $619 million a year, every year. Now that gets divided up. It's going to go to our community college systems, our public school systems, but specific to the city of Oakland, and we'll post these online so you can look at these. These are some ideas of what that money could buy each and every year. But next slide. Some specific things. I thought we had, so this is again Prop 19. It is estimated. No, go back. Sorry. I thought we had a different slide that showed a list of some of the things specific, the different jurisdictions in Oakland. So the city of Oakland is estimated, after this is fully implemented, so that is not tomorrow. If this passes, it probably would not be fully implemented for for about 7 years. But the city of Oakland is likely to see an estimated increase in annual revenues of about $63 million. There are other local things like AC Transit, our bus service, would stand to see an increase in their annual revenues. So a lot of local things, you would see a lot more public services at the local level. Again, a reminder that both Prop 15 and Prop 19, the money would primarily go to local governments. And again, a reminder that Prop 19 would establish specifically, it would earmark money for fire protection, which is a particular risk in Oakland, California. So just wanted to add those specific pieces of information. Next slide. Quickly, Prop 16 and 21. Prop 16 would lift the ban on affirmative action and allow universities, local governments in contracting and hiring to consider diversity and racial equity in decision making. It's optional though, and why I say this is an Oakland specific proposition is I believe that in the city of Oakland there is absolute political will to avail ourselves of a Prop 16 passage and do a more specific and intentional job of incorporating diversity and racial equity into different governmental decisions. We got a question ahead of time on Thought Exchange. It said, Mayor, where do you stand on Prop 16? I have endorsed Prop 16. Tonight we're trying to be neutral, but I was asked that question. I will be posting on my personal and political social media channels my personal endorsements in the election for those of you who want to know. but tonight is purely educational and informational. I also highlight Prop 21 because Prop 21 would give local governments the option of expanding rent control. And I just want to recognize that Oakland has more than 60% renters, a high percentage of renters in our city compared to other cities, and a history of activism and political will around tenant protections. So Prop 21, if it passes, is likely to get utilized in Oakland, whereas it might never get used in other jurisdictions that don't have that political will. Next slide. Prop 17, Prop 20, and Prop 25 all have to do with the criminal justice system. And the reason I highlight these is Oakland has a disproportionate share of those who have been formerly incarcerated, and also the loved ones, the family members of those who are currently or have formerly been incarcerated. And that's why I think it's important to talk about these three propositions. If Prop 17 passes, there are 50,000 former felons in California that would gain the right to vote. And that would be disproportionately large in the city of Oakland. Supporters of Prop 17 say that having the right to vote will create more engaged citizens, people that are more positive and active in our community. Next slide. Prop 20 would reverse parts of voter-approved reforms that decreased our prison population and therefore also prison spending. A lot of those savings were invested in local mental health and addiction treatment and victim services. Prop 20 would lower the felony threshold. It would likely increase the number of Oaklanders who have felony convictions, because it takes a lot of things that are misdemeanors and now makes them felonies. It would also increase the number of people returning to Oakland from prison that will not have received any rehabilitation services. That is also a part of the proposition. It would likely increase the time that many Oakland children and loved ones would have to wait for their family to be reunited, as well as increase the number of Oakland families with this added barrier of a felony record, which is a proven barrier to gaining employment, getting houses, and accessing other benefits. So that is Prop 20's impact on Oakland. And finally, Prop 25. Prop 25 is kind of a referendum to affirm whether or not Californians want to go forward with SB 10, which I believe our own Assembly member Rob Bonta was a co-author of SB 10, that would eliminate the cash bail system. It would replace that system with risk assessments to determine whether a detained suspect, this is someone who's been arrested and charged but has not yet been found guilty of a crime, that's what they mean by detained, whether they should be released from jail before their trial. So in Oakland, local jails like Alameda County's Santa Rita jail spend about $5 million every day holding people in jails who are detained. They have not been convicted yet of a crime, but they often are staying in jail because they cannot afford bail. And for those who can afford, who struggle with paying bail, they often go to bail bondsmen. The average bail bond costs $5,000 in Oakland. It is non-refundable. Even if the case is dismissed, thrown out, or the defendant wins, that $5,000 is forever lost. Bail bonds disproportionately affect Black and Latino Oaklanders, and more than 2/3 of those groups are already asset poor. That means that they do not have savings or other liquefiable assets to even pay for 3 months of living expenses. So a lot of struggling folks in Oakland that may find financial relief should Prop 25 pass. Next slide. So those are just some Oakland-specific impacts of state measures. Now I want to go to pros and cons on the local measures. Measure QQ. would allow youth to vote in school board election. These are 16 and 17-year-olds that would get to vote only in school board elections. Next slide. Measure RR, and I want to thank Councilmember Dan Kolb. He texted me. He's actually listening to the town hall tonight. Thank you, Councilmember Kolb, for writing Measure RR. It would allow the city council to adopt higher fines than what is currently the cap, and it has been in place for a long time, back when $1,000 was a whole lot of money. It would allow the city council, through a public hearing and an ordinance, which requires 2 votes. So it would have a lot of public notice and a lot of opportunity for public participation. The council would be allowed both to set a higher cap on all fines, but it would allow the council to create higher fines than $1,000 for repeat offenders or particularly bad offenders. And proponents were particularly inspired by the problem with illegal dumping, as well as housing habitability violations, where those fines are capped currently at $1,000. And again, we got a question ahead of time from someone in the public asking, can fines on dumping be raised to just an unlimited amount? And so the answer to that is not exactly. The city council will have to adopt a new total cap on fines. And so it cannot be unlimited. It will be subject to a newly adopted cap. And any new fines must be set through a public hearing and an ordinance, which requires at least 2 hearings by the full city council. So that is Measure RR. Next slide. Measure S1, it's a cleanup measure to Measure LL that was passed in 2016 that established the country's strongest and most independent citizen police commission. And S1 would actually strengthen the independence. It would allow the police commission to hire its own inspector general that would be completely independent from both the police department and the city administrator, as well as being able to hire their own attorneys. So many people feel this is exactly what the original measure intended. This is a cleanup and just better expressing what the intent of the voters were and allow the commission to function as it was intended. This is endorsed by a lot of folks, not a particularly, there will be a small fiscal impact, but there were no arguments in opposition to Measure S1 submitted. Next slide. Measure Y is for our schools. It is a bond issue, and it would allow the school district to start modernizing a lot of school facilities, improve the safety and health, security standards. I know we're thinking a lot about air quality right now, and all those improvements would be able to be financed by a bond measure. Now, somebody sent a question in ahead of time asking, will Measure Y raise my taxes? Well, it probably will a little bit for a short amount of time. A bond issue is not a parcel tax. It's not a set tax that everyone pays the same amount. It's based on the assessed value of your property. So the average home owner in Oakland would be paying $53 for every $100,000 of assessed value of your home. So if you owned a $300,000 home, assessed at that much, not the market value, the assessed value, which tends to be much lower, you would pay $159 a year for Measure Y. But the good news is in 2023, not too far away, a lot of the school district's older bonds will mature and go away. So by 2025, this is actually unlikely to create a net increase to the taxes you pay because those older bonds will be going away at that time. Next slide. Alameda County has a Measure W called Home Together. It is an increase of 0.5 cents on your sales tax. So when purchases are made in Alameda County, anywhere in Alameda County, instead of the current 9.25% sales tax, we would be paying 9 3/4, like 9.75% in sales tax. Now, this is a general tax. It could go for any of the fabulous and very important services that the county provides. The county, though, has said that a big focus is naturally going to be on homelessness. Now, somebody ahead of time sent in a question to me asking, and I'm actually going to read it because it's a very good question, about whether or not, why is it that Alameda County cannot improve services to homelessness through a portion of the sales tax revenue that's already there. Instead of making the sales tax even higher, the county already has the highest tax rate in the state. So I think the answer to that is look at the state of homelessness now. Clearly, the county has not been able to address homelessness. We have seen it more than double, certainly in Oakland. And a recent systems analysis done by HUD, done by the federal government, showed a tremendous funding gap between the funding available to address homelessness now and what is needed to actually decrease and eventually end homelessness. So again, this is a general tax, but there has been a lot of promises that it would be focused on homelessness. A citizen oversight committee appointed by the Board of Supervisors will review the expenditures of Measure W funds to ensure they're appropriate and make sure that annual audits are done by CPAs. Next slide. Measure V, this does not impact you if you live in Oakland. It literally just extends a tax paid only by people in the unincorporated parts of Alameda County, like Castro Valley and Cherryland, and it goes to support their services, but everyone gets to vote on it, even if you don't live there. Next slide. I think that's it for our local measures. I went through them hopefully not too quickly, but let's put up the thought exchange slide again in case people have questions or comments. We want to hear from you. This is supposed to be interactive. We want to get your questions, your opinions, and we do want you to feel free, while we're trying to not express our opinions on which things to vote for, but rather educate you. You are free to do that yourself. I know this is Oakland. We have a lot of passionate opinions about our politics. So please feel free to text 603-585-348 to 72855. We'd love to hear from you on Thought Exchange. And I had a couple other general questions that were not about the election, but I'd be happy to answer those now. One question was someone who was really frustrated with walking by the impacts of homelessness on 23rd Avenue. The question was, who can I vote for? Who will take care of what makes me want to throw up every day when I walk down my street? And one, I can't exactly answer your question. I can say that everyone recognizes that the health and safety impacts of street encampments are not acceptable. They're not acceptable for our unsheltered residents or the sheltered residents around them. I really commend you to tune into the city council meeting on October 20th, this coming Tuesday. The city council will be taking up a encampment management policy that will put into law Oakland's values that we will not cite or arrest homeless people ever, that we lead with compassion, with services, with outreach and offers of shelter. But it also identifies the type of health and safety impacts that are not acceptable. And it lays out a process for addressing those impacts, for trying to mitigate them, and in some cases where the conflict is too great, to assist that encampment in relocating or moving to shelter. And so if this is an issue that you care about, and I know a lot of people care deeply about homelessness, both our compassionate responsibility to care for those who are going through the completely immoral and unacceptable experience of homelessness, but also recognize that we have to maintain healthy and safe public spaces. So please tune in. This policy does a very good job of addressing both of those values at the same time for Oaklanders. I commend you to pay attention to this particular debate as the City Council takes the issue up on October 20th. And with that, I want to ask if there are any other questions or comments or opinions that have come in on Thought Exchange. While we wait for that, I can read some other information about the new revenues that would come with the passage of Prop 15. Oakland Unified School District, our Oakland Public Schools, it is estimated once fully implemented, Prop 15 would add $25.6 million a year, every year, to the public school budget in Oakland. The Peralta Community Colleges, our community college system here in Oakland. The passage of Proposition 15 is estimated to, once fully implemented, create an additional $9 million a year, every year for our community college system. So those are some of the impacts on the delivery of those public systems.
May I just add something here? Because
sure, please.
One of those early questions that came in said, is there anywhere where we could learn more about the financial impacts of the ballot measures? And one omission was that I didn't direct all of you to votersedge.org, a wonderful service. You type in your address and your entire ballot will be presented to you. And for each person and each issue, you will be able to choose a link to get more information. And of course, at the League of Women Voters of Oakland.org, we have a really magnificent website this year with lots of information, everything from, registrations of all the forums for all the school board candidates and the city council candidates and candidates for other offices, as well as a great number of videos and textual information on all the state measures and all the local measures. So as much time as you have, you've got a playground to play in with those two resources.
Thank you so much, Gail. That was very helpful. I also got one question ahead of time from a struggling small business owner. Please go to oaklandca.gov, go to the City of Oakland's website. There are lots of resources for small business owners, and specifically oaklandca.gov/CARES Act. There is a grant program for home-based businesses, which it sounds like this particular person is. Also, a reminder that the commercial eviction moratorium in Oakland has also been extended as long as the state's one is in effect. All right, we've got some good questions. I love the first question. Is it true that Measure S1 will get OPD out from under federal oversight? I will take that one if you don't mind, Gail. Measure S1 does not in and of itself do that, but I do believe that the Oakland Police Commission is a very critical part. I'm editorializing now. I believe it is a very critical part of demonstrating to the court that the reforms that Oakland police have made will be sustained and frankly enhanced over time. So I, as the mayor, would give you my very professional opinion that it will definitely enhance the ability or the chances of Oakland getting out from federal oversight without question, although it does not do that magically in and of itself. Gail, there was a question about Prop 21. I mentioned it briefly because it gives cities more flexibility to enact stronger rent control rules. I mentioned that Oakland has a high percentage of renters and a history of enacting strong tenant protections. But I don't know, do you have the ability to do a quick pro and con on Prop 21?
I think I do. Let me just turn here and grab my notes to make sure I give.
And I will quickly say that Prop 20 would definitely increase the prison population. I believe that both opponents and proponents agree on that because it would create many more felonies. It would definitely increase the prison population.
Okay, so Prop 21 has to do with rent control. So Costa-Hawkins is the existing law in the state. Okay, so there's the proposed changes here are some modifications of Costa-Hawkins. Local jurisdictions like Oakland are going to work within whatever limitations are set at the state level. So, for example, currently, Costa-Hawkins prohibits rent control of single-family homes. That would change if this measure passes. And if someone owned at least 2 homes and was renting them out, then they might be subject to rent control should a local jurisdiction decide to move in that direction. Under the current law, no buildings constructed after 1995 can be subject to rent control. So that takes us back 25 years. So instead of setting a date certain like that, this new proposal would say nothing that has been built in the last 15 years. So this would.
Gail, I think in Oakland it's actually 1983, just the way Costa-Hawkins works.
Okay, great. Then I stand corrected because I know you're better on the Oakland law than I am.
Well, but then there's the recent legislation and how that interfaces.
Right,
it's very confusing. But this would definitely allow cities like Oakland to do stronger tenant protections. And based on Oakland's history, I as the mayor would say Oakland would be likely to take advantage of that. But yes. It's got some interesting people for against, like Governor Newsom is actually against Prop 21.
Mm-hmm. The third interesting thing it would change is that right now, at least statewide, the rule is that when a tenant leaves, and you have a new renter, then you can raise the rent to market value. This would put a limit on that and say that you could not raise it more than, I think, 15% over the course of 3 years. So it's a shift in the frame. And as you say, Oakland has been much more active in this area. Currently, I was reading rent control only covers about 25% of renters throughout the state. So obviously we're different than other cities, and the overall effect of the change statewide is difficult to predict because you don't know how many jurisdictions are going to get more active than they have been to move in this direction.
That's right. I hope that answered your question, whoever asked that. Prop 24, I agree, it is confusing. It says it's very confusing. Does it actually create privacy, or are there loopholes seen as the ACLU and other organizations oppose it? And what are the league's reason for opposing it?
So remember I said this is a 52-page proposition. That in itself, the league, and I'm going to speak a little bit about that advocacy.
You're allowed to put your advocacy hat on, Gail.
Okay, we're into the after party now. Okay. So it's the very fact that it is a 52-page proposition, and bringing something to the voters should work on the idea that you can wrap your head around it. And I mean, really, what are the odds? So it is confusing, it is long, it's a bit inaccessible. And are there loopholes? Well, what's really interesting to me is I don't know that I would call them loopholes, but the main proponent behind the existing law, which was just passed, and this modification are the same person who'd really been leading the charge for it, which is interesting. Nonetheless, what is being proposed here is not just an add-on. It makes changes. So it shifts the landscape. Instead of companies having, 50,000 households in their purview, those being subject to the law. Now it's 100,000. Is that a loophole? Does it let the ones with fewer out? No, it's just a change. But the shifts, because they're not parallel and because it's not an exact build on to the existing thing, I can't say, yes, this makes things stronger, because in some ways it strengthens certain provisions, like with respect to DNA evidence being collected. And in other ways, it's not as strict.
I think that's great. I think I'm allowed to, since the league gets to talk about your endorsements, I guess I can talk about mine. This was the one proposition I said, there are arguments on both sides. I recently decided to endorse it in the idea that not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I believe that the issues of privacy are ones that government needs to pay a lot more attention to. And it is my assessment that this creates a floor, not a ceiling. It protects things that the legislature did already to protect privacy, and it would prevent those protections from getting rolled back while still leaving room for added protections to come along through the legislative process. That was my thinking, but it is very confusing. There are good people on both sides. Oh, that's a terrible thing to say. Anyway, it's a very confusing proposition. I agree with that. Prop 25, this is a great question. What exactly do they mean by risk assessment tools? While cash bail is obviously bad, how can we be sure that risk assessment isn't also biased and racist? And that is definitely an issue that has been raised. And there are many people or organizations that I respect tremendously that are actually opposing Prop 25 for this exact reason. Gail, do you want to talk a little bit more detail about the risk assessment tool?
Yes, the risk assessment tool, people refer to algorithms, and there's a concern anytime you get into the numbers and you start trying to identify what will be crunched into the numbers, that things that are already baked into the system that are systemically biased against certain populations will be baked into the assessment tool. So you're absolutely right. It's divided people. But some of the things that they will be looking at are things such as how embedded in the community is a person? Are they employed? Are they supported by family? There are also going to be increased opportunities, I understand, over the present for the judge to speak with those charged and to solicit more information. But there are other jurisdictions throughout the country who are working with this. And as I understand, there's a law, number 36, that just got passed, which is calling for the reassessment of these tools on an annual basis. So again, we come to, shall the perfect be the enemy of the good, on the people who want to support this no cash bail, because they're saying we can always change it if these annual assessments show that bias is being revealed.
Great question for you, Gail. How do propositions get put on the ballot in the first place?
Oh, so interesting. Well, first of all,
because it's not true in every state. California is somewhat unique, right?
In this, as in so many other ways, yes, we are interesting and unique. So first of all, as I alluded to with some things like Prop 15, when I asked the question, why are you being asked to decide this? It's because there's a change in the Constitution proposed. So that's not anybody's choice. That's just the law. The change in the Constitution is being proposed because somebody wants to add, delete, or change something, then it's coming to the ballot. Okay, then it gets a little more complicated after that. People can go out on an initiative and get a lot of signatures. I'm sure you've been approached by many people asking for your signature just so it can get on the ballot. So I think the number of signatures is a factor of the number of people who voted in the last gubernatorial election. If you can collect that many signatures and have them verified, then the measure that you are proposing will appear on our ballots. That's one way. Second way, there can be a law passed such as some of the laws that we've been talking about tonight, like the privacy law. It's just gotten rolling, but it's not really really in effect yet. You can call a referendum on the law and get that on the ballot that way. And finally, the legislature can move something to the ballot. So it's one reason why you could spend a long time in our elections studying these measures, because there are many roads that lead to Rome here.
Yes. Example of a referendum.
I'm sorry?
Prop 25, wasn't that an example of a referendum on the Senate bill?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, the privacy one, the big, long, overly complicated Prop 24, that was an initiative. One individual went out and paid signature gatherers to put that on the ballot, correct?
Right.
Yeah. And not every state allows just average citizens to go out and gather signatures to put measures on the ballot. That is somewhat unique in California, and that is often why our ballots are so long, because a lot of them have gotten there that way. I have just a comment. I'll share it for those who can't see it. It says, I think this is with regard to Prop 15, a very controversial proposition and probably one of the most impactful if it passes. It will really be a transformational shift in how we fund government in California, especially local government. Again, all the revenues would go to local governments, not the state. But this person says it will cause businesses to leave California. Why weaken Prop 13 in any way? I say no. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And then the last question we have tonight, before maybe I ask Gail for you to give some kind of closing comments, is do you have statistics by zip code to identify neighborhoods that need specific focus? And my answer is yes. And I want to really commend the city of Oakland. We have a Department of Race and Equity headed up by the phenomenal Darlene Flynn. And so much of our racial equity work is really looking at data, looking at outcomes and analyzing which groups are doing well, which groups are not doing well, and then asking ourselves, why? What is it about our services, the physical environment in our neighborhoods that are creating these disparate outcomes? And can we make adjustments to our policies or our service provisions to actually start shrinking those disparities? And for example, when we came out with our 3-year paving plan, we call it the Great Pave, we really looked at what are some factors that would make road conditions more impactful in some parts of Oakland than others. In parts of the city that have large percentages of elderly or disabled residents, bad road conditions could actually be more harmful. If people are low income, a flat tire or a broken axle could be much more economically devastating than in parts of the city with higher incomes. And we took different factors like that into account as we distributed the funding for road repaving. That's an equity analysis. That's the type of analysis that we're trying to do more and more in Oakland to really address the actual needs that we see. So those are some examples of how we definitely are looking at zip codes and other levels of data to really look at where our services need to go and not just respond to complaints, but be more proactive. Gail, I want to invite you to give some closing thoughts. You have been a great champion for the League of Women Voters. You have been an amazing kind of voice for democracy and just getting out and having your voice count. Please give us some closing comments as we wrap up.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you again. As I mentioned at the beginning, voter education is at the heart of the League's work, and it is wonderful work to connect yourself with other residents in the city of Oakland. So I highly encourage you to check out your local league, League of Women Voters of Oakland. It's a vibrant group of people becoming deliberately much more diverse and welcoming to the whole breadth of the population in Oakland and working in every sector of the city and with other local organizations and groups. So please consider that. And then personally for you, kudos to you for taking on this program this evening and spending your evening doing this. And I just want to say, for those of you who are challenged by our times and who isn't, this is not a test. If you can't educate yourself on all the ballot measures, you know what? You don't have to vote on all of them. I suggest you look seriously at your ballot and say, which ones are impactful? We've tried to point some of those out to you, and particularly Mayor Schaaf has underscored the ones that might have some real reverberations in the city of Oakland. So don't feel badly if those are the ones where you spend your time. And finally, I'm sure the wonderful staff that's been assisting us tonight has put those resources in the chat. League of Women Voters of Oakland, you'll be amazed, and the votersedge.org, terrific resources for you. And if for some reason you don't have internet access, you know, our libraries are open, and librarians are fabulous people who will answer the phone and answer your questions. Okay, good night and thank you.
Gail, thank you so much. I want to give my closing comments. I remember one of my first League of Women Voter events was a debate about whether or not Oakland should have the strong mayor form of government. Little did I recognize how relevant that would be in my life. I owe the League my passion, my interest in local government, and my feeling that I, as just one person, even a young person in the city of Oakland, could make a difference by becoming knowledgeable about what the issues are and how things can actually get changed. So thank you to the League for 100 years of incredible service. And please, for those of you who watched tonight, this will be recorded. If you're going to have a Zoom this weekend with your best friends to go through your ballots together, it is a fun social event to have, you know, back and forth. You can share this knowledge. You can replay parts of this program because it is recorded. So thank you for spending your evening to find out about what change is possible for California, for Alameda County, for Oakland, and like, God bless our democracy. We cannot take it for granted. I don't think there's anything like the last 4 years that have taught us that. So please go exercise it, no matter how dissatisfied you are that it is not perfect. It will not be perfect if you don't participate. So thank you for doing that. Please call us. We are always here for more resources, and just have your voice. Stand up, be heard. That is what Oakland is about. Have a good night. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about the state of the city, which actually talks about some of these ballot measures. The state of the city, Oakland, that's going to be a fun, wide-ranging conversation. The state of the city in 2 weeks.